I'm going to start now. I started the recording, so you can go ahead and share your screen at any time.
Yeah, well, when I need it, then.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Well, the structure I have thought of for this night is that we can, since I was told this is sort of a worship setting or a church service for some, or for me, because today I missed out on one. And so we're catching up together here. I thought we can share a word of scripture together, have a spiritual meditation, a text upon which to reflect for a couple of minutes. And then I'm eager to share 2-3 things about the place where I work and about our conference. And from there, we take it wherever we want with the comments and the questions that you might have brought. Is that okay with you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I see a couple of thumbs. So let's just delve with it. Delve in. Did you bring your Bibles? Show me your Bibles. Well, most of you will have it on the screen or on the mobile. That's fine with me. You can already turn to Matthew 12 if you want. That's the text that I chose for tonight. And one day, Jesus was surrounded by semioticians. This is how our text for today begins in Matthew 12:38. Now, that is not a literal quotation. Literally, it says, some of the scribes and Pharisees answered, "Teacher, we want to see a sign from you." That's why I was talking about semiotics. Semiotics, as you know, is the science, of symbols, and it goes back to the Greek philosophers. Aristotle already, he stated, the spoken words are the signs of ideas in the soul. Probably the most famous modern semiotician is or was Umberto Eco. And one novel that is intensely and mischievously about the power of signs is his Foucault's Pendulum. In this novel, the protagonist searches the meaning of a coded document, and he ends up in the occult sciences and the world of conspiracy clubs. And this is the point, obviously, where most devout Christians lose nerves, because it gets spooky. In the end, however, and I advise everyone who doesn't want to know the end, for spoiler alert, so they just, put your fingers in your ears. In the end, it turns out that the document is nothing more than a medieval shopping list with spelling mistakes. Umberto Eco needs about 700 pages to get to that point. Now, all of us who believe in God are in some sense semioticians. We look around us in one way or another to see if everyday life holds coded signs for us. And this can be quite exhausting if done excessively. The Pharisees and scribes, the semioticians of the day, demanded a sign from Jesus. And let's see how this dialogue unfolds in verse 38 and onward. Then certain of the scribes and Pharisees answered him, saying, "Teacher, we would like to see a sign from thee." But he answered and said unto them, "An evil and adulterous generation craves for a sign, and yet no sign shall be given to it, but the sign of Jonah the prophet. For just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the sea monster, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. The man of Nineveh shall stand up with his generation at the judgment and shall condemn it, because They repented at the preaching of Jonah, and behold, something greater than Jonah is here. The queen of the south shall rise up with this generation at the judgment and shall condemn it, because she came from the ends of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and behold, something greater than Solomon is here. That's our text, our passage. Jesus does not react enthusiastically, nor even nicely, to this demand. First, he calls this generation evil and adulterous. Then he babbles something about Jonah. Then he draws a judgment scene in which the people of Nineveh and the queen of Sheba point a stern finger at this generation. So why is Jesus pissed? Perhaps the immediate context will help, because we only started in verse 38. What have we missed if you look at the chapter? Shortly before, those Pharisees had asked him if it was allowed to heal on the Sabbath. They point to a man with a crippled hand, and Jesus, without hesitation, heals the man. This is not only a rather eloquent answer to their question, but also a tangible miracle. The reaction of the Pharisees, verse 14, they counseled together against him and to how they might destroy him. They want to hire a hitman. As if to top it off, the text continues provocatively from verse 15 on, and Jesus, perceiving it, withdrew from thence, and many followed him, and he healed them all. He healed them all. And it even gets worse. After no more sick person is to be found, they bring one of whom it is said he was possessed, blind, and dumb, verse 22. They bring one, and this smells a bit like, let's see if he can crack this nut. Relatively straightforwardly, the text continues, verse 22, and he healed him. This brief review explains two things. First, the whole chapter is already an exhausting discussion with the religious elite that is slowly reaching boiling point. And secondly, one must have, as we say in soccer, there's the Denmark-Czech Republic game just going on next door here. One must have quite cojones at this point, after all the miracles, to demand, we want to see a sign. Even as a disinterested reader, one wants to react. What else? What else? Maybe a little levitation, some shiny letters written on the wall, fiery hosts and armies of angels, or more of the excellent wine made of water so that we can all celebrate together. What else? Religiosity, according to a first and sober conclusion, harbors the danger of greed. More signs, more miracles. Whether it is for self-assurance or to exercise the last doubt is irrelevant. Insatiable religious greed, notwithstanding the fact that they are looking for a sign to justify their hiring of the hitman. The scribes' teaching and the Pharisees' law-keeping made them cold-hearted, and this is disturbing. That is the evil and adulterous generation of which Jesus speaks. The danger that one can be so intensely occupied with God that one is no longer interested in people. And at this point, Jesus brings up a dubious hero, Jonah. If you want a sign, then you will only get that of Jonah, he says. And because this is mysterious enough in itself, it is explained in more depth. The sign of Jonah is that Jesus, the Son of Man, will be dead 3 days and 3 nights. We get that. We get that. We could actually be satisfied with it. We know the end. We know that Jesus will die and that he will not stay in the belly of the earth. That is the Easter story. And so many theologians say this text was composed after Jesus, and therefore they added explanations. And the Ninevites, as well as the legendary queen from Africa, have been chosen in order to legitimize the mission to the Gentiles. Theologians have such a way of dodging the text by clever explanations. This explanation doesn't take into account the dispute between the Pharisees and scribes and Jesus. So my question is, what will the scribes and Pharisees have heard and understood in this dialogue when they hear about the Son of Man who will stay in the belly of the earth for 3 days and nights? They knew nothing about the cross at this point, but they know the story of Jonah. They are scribes after all. Even the last of the atheists knows Jonah today. So is this text really only about the number 3? Is it about arithmetics? Did Jesus quote Jonah only because it just fit 1, 2, 3, just like Jonah? The judgment words that follow make it clear Jesus talks about the story, not about the fish and the 3 days. Whether Jonah was a scribe, I do not know, but he was a prophet. Not a particularly presentable one, though. A prophet with left-right weakness, with an escape reflex, with a tendency to take wrong turns. A prophet with a phenomenal sleep. A prophet who thinks a human sacrifice can appease God. A prophet who stinks of fish. A prophet who prays only in distress, but then quite beautifully. A prophet who can preach fire and brimstone, but is surprised that anyone really listens. A prophet who loves the cool shadow more than people. A prophet who, sitting in his box seat with popcorn and soda, waits for the rains of fire he has announced for the start of the big barbecue. He who has such a prophet no longer needs an idol. So the sign of Jonah is that a prophet is someone who constantly experiences that God thwarts his ideas and plans. Exactly what the Pharisees and scribes had also just experienced repeatedly. And so in those words of judgment, it is not Jonah who comes on the scene, but the people of Nineveh. And they point to the Pharisees and scribes, and thus to us, and say, we changed. What about you? By the way, the Jonah story ends with a moral, and I think it is this moral that makes Jesus quote this story in view of the demand for signs. It reads in the original, and the Lord said, "Thou hast had regard for the God for which thou hast not labored, neither madest it grow, which came up in a night and perished in a night. And should not I have regard for Nineveh, that great city wherein are more than 600,000 persons that cannot discern between their right hand and their left hand, and also much cattle." So the sign of Jonah is not the number 3. The sign of Jonah is that Jesus wants exactly what God wanted with Jonah, and even more, that Jesus will also be ready to lay down his life. But this time, not because he believes in human sacrifice and wants to appease an angry God, but because he loves people. Throughout the chapter we have been looking at, Jesus was concerned about people, sick people being made well, possessed people being made free. So what is the bottom line? Where are we with our desire for signs? It seems to me that Jesus wants to provoke us here. If you want a sign, do as God does. Love people. Devote yourself to their well-being, to their liberation. Look into their eyes, listen to them, lay your hands on them, take them in your arms, pray for them. The sign of Jonah is that the Son of Man was inside the earth for 3 days and nights. Fair enough. But why? Why was he there? Because he was not concerned with being right, but with practicing love. Love until death. And another thing, because he did not stay there, but life triumphed. 3 days and nights in the belly of a fish, that's one thing. A crucified man rising from the grave, that's an even bigger thing. But the biggest thing, the sign of Jonah, the sign of Jesus, is that God does all this because he cares about you and about me. Let's say amen to a wonderful text about the sign of J, which is the title of the presentation. Okay, let us just take reflection time before I try to kill you with information about me and about this part of Germany. Perhaps there's 1 or 2 thoughts about this passage before we just move on. I don't know if that is a raised hand, Lauren. Or if you raise it in the last 20 minutes and I fail to acknowledge.
No, don't worry about the raised hands right now, Dennis. We'll get to those a little later.
Okay.
I had raised my hand as an example
Yeah,
here
okay.
to show people how it works, and I forgot to take it off.
Yes. So my question just was if on the spiritual side of this reflection, if there are any reaction before we get local.
Well, I will just say thank you very much. The concept of taking care of people before we take care of organizations, institutions, uh, policies, and doctrines seems to me extremely apt right now, and I hope others feel the same way. And if that is the way that you run the Hansa conference and direct your pastors, and your pastors are with you with that, I think you are very fortunate. I don't know if others want to join in on this. Raise your hand, and then we'll go on to talking about what it's like to be a Christian in a very Ron, go ahead, Ron.
You need to unmute.
Okay. I was interrupted when you started. So I was on a phone call and I heard you made a statement and I noted it. And I want to know if you can clarify. Here's what I wrote. Religiosity harbors greed. I agree with that. Please elaborate.
Well, actually, it's not a thesis, it's more an observation, because here it is the more religious people which contend with Jesus, and people who would call and deem themselves religious and religious leaders at that. And it is an observation that I have towards the text, but also towards religiosity in the church, because sometimes you can get so religious that we want more. I'm thinking of a couple of conversations. It's not a bad thing to have more, but more of what? More of the personal experience, more of indulging in emotional senses, more of science, like as in the text. And there's the danger of greed. I just am reminded of one person years ago who was taken completely captive of a rather charismatic movement in the south of Germany with signs and wonders and the whole works. And I discussed with him late night, and the one sentence that struck me, he used one again and again, was, I want more of that. I want more of that. I want to get in there. I want more of that. And I met this person 4 or 5 years later when he was spun out of the movement because of complete frustration and spiritual abuse and very ugly things going on there. And he said, I was a victim of my own greed. Perhaps I hope that elaborates.
No, that's. I mean, I've never thought of that before, but it strikes me as being apt. It's something quite apt.
Yeah, and the difference I wanted to show is that Jesus himself wasn't into getting more and more and more of God. He was in giving more and more to people, and this is a completely different perspective.
Ted Wright Snyder?
Oh, I was interested in the text that we discussed, that the folks wanted a sign, which discussion in an Adventist environment might be sort of ironic. We're the world's best sign watchers. And we always are looking for signs that confirm our notions about what's going to happen in the future. Are we any different than the Jews? I guess there was a different purpose. They wanted a sign that he was from God, but we want signs from God or about God or indicating something relative to the religious life. So we're sign watchers too.
We want signs that our church is from God.
Well, the one thing that I through the years I have acquired when reading the Gospels is that whenever I read about the scribes and the Pharisees, which are often in conflict and dispute with Jesus, I have gotten rid of the feeling that it's just them. They are just a legalistic bunch, and Jesus had to deal with them. And it has struck me at time and again that whenever I read about scribes and Pharisees, the religious leaders, now being a conference president and a spiritual leader myself, even being a pastor before, I shudder and I think about, well, this is talking about me. There's a danger. This is talking about me, So I need to be alert here and see what Jesus replies, because I identify with the Pharisee and the scribe just for the function which I have as a pastor or as a church administrator. So I need to be watching here what's going on.
That's a very good point, Dennis. If you really understand the Gospels, all of the denunciations of the Pharisees and scribes were really denunciations of the church of his day.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And if you study a bit about the Pharisees, they are not, we know that from New Testament studies ever since 1985 from the famous book by E.P. Sanders, we know that the Pharisees wasn't just the legalistic bunch they were displayed to be for hundreds of years in Christian perception. They were actually quite devout people, and they were actually, and Jesus clashed with them so often because the Pharisees were where Jesus was. They were with the people. They were really concerned, to straighten out in everyday life and to straighten out the people. And that's where the clashes, that's why Jesus doesn't have so many clashes with the Sadducees here and there, but they are just more like the elitist, intellectual bunch of the day. And they just don't clash that much with Jesus. They don't cross in everyday life, but the Pharisees are there.
We need to have a discussion sometime, Dennis. I think you'd be interested after this presentation. I think you'd be a good person to lead it, about religion and culture and how they work together, religion, culture, and our own psychology. Somebody just said here in a note saying that a lot of devout and fanatic members probably have psychological problems and can cause a lot of mayhem. And indeed, I've often wondered that myself. How many of my church members who caused the most trouble were not doing it out of great piety or great knowledge, but out of other things that were driving them. And so we need to have that discussion sometime. I don't see any more hands up, Dennis. Let's go on to part of your presentation because, James, do you want to go ahead and speak? Let me get you in here. James Becraft from Tascadero, somewhere down there, James. Go ahead.
California. My wife and I just returned from crawling around in ancient Egyptian tombs and seeing all the hieroglyphs. And as I'm walking through there, I'm thinking through these tombs and seeing all the hieroglyphs and all the amazing stuff that was done in the name of religion. I kept thinking about Smedley Butler, the guy that did the book about religion, war as a racket. And on some level, I thought religion is a racket. You have these priests, these guilds that create these amazing monuments and all of this stuff, basically to keep the people busy and to with rather faulty ideas. And so at what level is Jesus basically saying to the Pharisees, that your religion and your greed, it's all a racket. It's really about what Dennis was saying about people. It's all about caring for people. And maybe those priests and the rackets in Egypt were caring about people, but how do we really focus on what Jesus' message was really care about people?
Yeah. James, I'm sure you've seen situations as I have through years in the church where people say, I don't know about this person, but we have to, let's say it's a disfellowshipping situation. We have to disfellowship them for the sake of the reputation of the church and the denomination, or we have to take this action or take this stand for the sake of the reputation of the church, saving the organization and not really caring too much about the people. That has always bothered me. Let me go on. Dennis, you probably want to go on with you could share your screen now if we're ready to talk. I'm very interested in what it's like to be in a place that is rather, let's say, post-Christian.
Yes. I'll give you a little presentation here. It should start now. Can you see it?
We can, yes.
Actually, I'm looking on my screens if I can see you, because I don't want to sit here without faces. Yeah, and I can see you now.
I am recording just the speaker and the screen that you're sharing. So.
Okay.
Not be able to see.
Am I looking good? Yeah. Thanks.
Your view in the upper right-hand corner, there's a little thing view, so you can see all of us if you want to. But I'm going to go ahead and make your face a little bigger here, so for sake of our recording.
Yeah, no, it's okay. As long as I can see a couple of faces here on my other screen. So if I look there, I'm looking at you actually. We have, I have just mentioned in the introduction, as a sort of surprise for those who haven't been interested in the administrative structure of Germany for the past decades. This is a very interesting subject, as you can imagine. That this conference has been established June 13th. So June 13th in a constituency meeting, we dissolved two conferences in order to merge into one. A rather complicated thing, because in Germany we have actually to be, we have to serve two masters. You know, the one is our church canons, to say, the working policies and everything that's pertaining to the structure of the Adventist Church. But every state in Germany, and we have 16 states here in Germany, has given us a certain status as a church, and we need to fulfill the conditions for being recognized as a church. And so we're serving two masters. And basically what we did by merging two conferences, we were merging 5 states. So we need 5 constitutions and 5 rules of order. So everything has to be done by 5, and some of the votes had to be taken, or most of the votes had to be taken 5 times by the delegates of the respective Bundesländer, so the states here. I'm just gonna show you here. You know, where am I? Come on, give me the next one. You can see that. You will see a map of Germany here. Though this is the whole country. You can see, let me just try to get a laser pointer here. Or can you see my mouse moving? Whatever. You can see the, no, I have forwarded here. You see, I'm really good at this. You can see the 16 states here. From most Americans will know Bavaria to the bottom right, and will fail on the naming of the rest of them. But that is not a problem. The north here is 5 states, and I will begin with the most eastern one, that is Mecklenburg-Vorpommern. You see, let me zoom in. I just showed you already, zoom in on the blue part here, which means that those are the 5 states here in the north. Now you will probably only see 3, because 2 of them are city states. The city of Hamburg and the city of Bremen are states in themselves here in Germany, the only 2, I think, apart from Berlin, being city states. Then we have Mecklenburg-Vorpommern. This is the part, East German part, or former East Germany. The border would run between Mecklenburg-Vorpommern and Schleswig-Holstein. Holstein, as you would say, you know, for the famous cows. Coming from here in the north, bordering on Denmark in the north, and then we have Lower Saxony to the south, which is the biggest in size. So the red line here, I just drew that red line to show you where the border between the 2 conferences used to be, former Hansa Conference and former Lower Saxonian Conference. So much just for the geographics. I'll just give you the boring figures right now. For this region, the population, you can see 50 million, 6,000 members. That means 1 Adventist for every 2,500 in the population. The number of churches and pastors, and the percentage of surface of Germany. So we are now, after the merger, the biggest conference in Germany, but only geographically, not by members, because structurally, you see, we only have 18% of the German membership. For those who know a bit, because the region of North Rhine-Westphalia and the region in the south where all the German cars are built, Those are the strong populated areas, and also the strong economic areas. So we have been, as the Hansa conference, we have been hauling in a deficit ever since the reunification every year. So we needed to be subsidized because very few members, and also those members won't have the high paid jobs that are usual in the south of Germany. That's just for the boring statistics. Now we more to the spirit and the attitude. What does the name mean? Hanse. What does it mean? Well, it is a very popular name here in the north because it goes back, and I'll show you a slide just right now, to the Hanseatic League, which was a merchant league in the medieval times. That's where it goes back to. This, for instance, is the logo of the Rostock soccer team, Hansa Rostock. So Hansa is big time here in this region, and you see the traditional Baltic merchant vessel here as their sign. So wherever if you're around Rostock, that city in the very north at the Baltic Sea, everything is Hansa or Hanse. These are the number plates of the region where we now live. You have Wismar, HWI, then you have Hamburg, HH, then you have Bremen, HB, Rostock, HRO, and you might wonder, why is there an H? Those are former and traditionally Hanseatic towns, because the Merchant League, the Hanseatic League, was a cartel of towns. And to this very day, it is displayed in the names of the towns. So I always wondered as a kid, why is Hamburg written with two H's, HH? It's because the whole name is Hanseatic Town of Hamburg or Hanseatic Town of Bremen. So that's how deep these roots run, and that's why when we suggest certain names, the majority of the delegates could identify with it. What we think of when we think Hanseatic is something maritime. Yeah, something that has to do with sea and seafaring and the coastline and with ships and all that. So this is a very typical touristic view at the harbor in Hamburg, with shanties being sung and so on. The second thing is what we think of is the figure of the Hanseatic merchant back then, traditionally, and nowadays. There's a long tradition of the Hanseatic merchant, someone who is good at what he does or she does, someone whose words count. And to this very day, here in the Hanseatic spirit, you don't always need a written contract, but a shaking of hands will do. If it is done between two Hanseatic merchants, it is still binding, even legally. So this is a bit of the spirit. But there weren't not only the rich cargo ships of the Hanseatic League, but also those who defied them. And this is the traditional picture of Klaus Störtebeker, the famous pirate of the Baltic Sea, who challenged the Hanseatic League by just robbing their cargo and living off the routes in the Baltic Sea, being executed, I think, 1401, with a very nice legend to it, because as custom was, he said if he is beheaded and his sailors are lined up, if his body can get up, being beheaded, as many men as he can still manage to walk past will be saved from beheading. And the legend says that I think he, after being beheaded, his body stood up and he managed to save 11 or 13 of his men. So you can figure that there are movies about that. Well, folklore. And here you can see this is a bit the historic part of it, the Hanseatic League around 1400 for around 300 years, which is a long stretch. The Hanseatic League stretched way out around the Baltic here with the rather historic map. And here are a couple of pointers, 300, 400 years. They virtually had a monopoly in the Baltic and North Seas, more than 200 settlements. The aim was protection for their ships and their cargo and duty-free trade. Obviously, they figured that out. So you can decide for yourself if that was something between a proto-EU or a cartel. Now, if you are a Störtebeker fan, then it would be the latter. And today, that's the point I wanted to make. Today, it is really a local identifier. Hanseatic means around the coastline, means in the north of Germany. So here, just I took the map from before. You can see that matches more or less. If you see, this is without it. The Hanseatic League, obviously, at its heyday, had more territory than just ours, but ours is really the heartland of the Hanseatic League. Hence the name Hanse. So we just changed, I said 2 years of work, one constituency meeting, thousands of votes, just to change one letter. So what are our challenges? Our first challenge, as you see here in the north of Germany, is population bleeding away. This chart here starts 1994, so that is 4 or 5 years after the reunification, with people leaving Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, which is our former East German part, in troves. Looking for jobs in the south, in the west, in Hamburg, around Hamburg, in the rest of Germany. Young people going away for studies. So this is quite a significant drop, and the drop in church membership would compare to that line. Now this is what we put in the header for today. The second challenge is atheism, especially in the eastern part, Mecklenburg-Vorpommern. I concentrated a bit on that. There was a sociologist, it says here in one of those headlines, Tom Smith, taking a look at it, that that this part of Germany and the rest of former East Germany, Saxon-Anhalt and Saxonia, are very atheist parts of the world, to an extent that many in other more Christian countries or religious countries won't understand, and it is very tough terrain to work, because people are not only they are not knowledgeable about it. They wouldn't be able to find Genesis in a Bible, let alone know what's in there. We often have to start at a point for us which feels like below zero, where we have to alphabetize people in the basics. So you can't just come around with this Adventist specifics or the standards. You really have to reinvent the wheel. One of the studies in missiology done, I think, a couple of years ago at the University of Greifswald in the northeastern part of Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, found out that was a study that was done in the Lutheran Church, and they wanted to know how long does it take for a non-churched person to become involved in church life if a conversion takes place. And the conversion duration in average was between 8 and 10 years. That's how long it takes someone to turn from an atheist to a devout Christian that is active in church. So this is, it is congruent with the experience that we have. You can't just run a crusade and hope that within three weeks or 3 months, people will be willing to give their lives to Jesus. It might take 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 10 years for them to be the occasional visitors or to be in contact with the church. I'm as yet busy with one lady giving her Bible studies, I think on and off when she needs it and when she calls, 10 years.
Can I ask a couple of questions,
Yes.
Dennis?
I'll just show you one last slide because that's the last one, and then I can see you again because I have all of the presentation here all over the place. I'll just show you our pastors here, just to cheer you up. Those are pastors from the 2 conferences at the last pastoral conference here, where we were trying to get our bones stretched during a Zoom meeting. Okay, let me unshare this screen and then I can see you again. Beautiful.
There we go. Let me ask you, is the Lutheran Church in any sense a state church, as has been true in some European countries in the past?
Well, legally and officially, we do not have any state churches in Germany, but historically, yes. Lutheranism is the way to go in the north of Germany if there is religiosity and Christian activity. It will largely be Lutheran. So we have good ties to the Lutheran Church. We have a very friendly relationship with them, and they would be the go-to church for anyone who might pick up on Christianity. The Catholics are really a diaspora here in the north. You rarely find anyone, and the Catholics, they roughly have the same terrain than the conference that we have in geography, and they, as we have, they have their bishop here in Hamburg, one for the whole region.
Is there any? We think of the primary kind of religion here in America as something probably between fundamentalism and evangelicalism, with a big smattering of charismatic religion mixed in there. In short, it tends to be fairly biblical in a rather literalist way. I don't think Lutheranism, as is traditionally practiced, is like that. What's the role of sort of biblical evangelical religion in that region?
In that region, it's basically non-existent. I would say, obviously, you can find every kind of denomination. If you look for it on the internet, you will find groups, and you will find charismatics here and there, and little groups. But on the whole scale, if you had to draw the religious landscape in sort of a 3D setting here in the north of Germany, or in all of Germany, but here in the north, it would, in all of Germany, it would be 2 big mountains. And the rest is a little bit of hill country, you know. So you have the Catholic Church, and you have the Lutheran Church, or the Reformed Church. They united since the 70s or something like that. And so the Protestants are Catholic. That's what you find on the documents. When I went to school, or when I applied for a passport, everybody asks you, Protestant or Catholic? There's no in between. There's no other thing. Now they have learned there are other things too. There are Muslims. We have learned this in the last 20, 30 years. We know there's others. And here in the north of Germany, I would actually say there's one mountain. Everything else is more or less leveled. You will find it, but the 99% reaction, if anyone asks you what religion you are and you say I'm a Seventh-day Adventist, would be seventh what, or carries what, or penta what.
They would just be puzzled by it.
Yeah, I wouldn't really know. What we have managed to do is to group them in our ecumenical councils, to at least group the families, and we have identified 4 Christian families. So you would have the Catholic family, you would have the Lutheran Reformed family, you would have the Orthodox family, and the rest what we call free churches. And that can be a rather colorful bunch. That's the rest.
Yeah. That when I was in England, I met the bishop of. We were in. My brother and I were in church one day, an Episcopal church, but the Bishop of Wales, and he asked me what religion I was, and I didn't even want to bother to try to explain Seventh-day Adventist to him. So I just said nonconformist, and he just smiled and walked away.
Yeah.
You find that your church, you said there's a population drain. Is that because people are moving? Is it because the birth rate is lowering? And how does that affect who's left in the church? Raj would probably tell you here in Ohio, for the years that we worked together, we saw the church graying and fewer children being in church. Are you finding your church growing older?
Yeah, we have Olive and Raj. I saw you. You will get to ask your questions. I just quickly want to answer that one. It's a concoction of several factors. One is really people moving away, especially young people, because there's not much here in terms of studies and finding jobs and establishing a family. There is somewhat of a new trend ever since 2 or 3 years of people actually moving back to their homeland because they have gotten a good education, and it's beautiful here. I mean, this part of Germany is where people come to spend their holidays. So some of whom have grown up here want to come back with their families, and so there's a bit of a new movement of people, highly skilled professionals who give it a try if they can find a job. Mm-hmm. So it would be that. It's also a bit of the graying. It's certainly also the part that sometimes we are clueless as to how to make the church grow and get new people in. Those are the things that we that we can't, we haven't found answers really.
Nor have we here. Dr. Hemmings?
Okay, thank you very much, Dennis. I missed
nice to see you.
Yeah, I missed some of your presentation, just some, because I was somewhere else. But I want to ask this question. It's difficult even for me to ask it. And in many ways, I first want to ask, when we say godless, what are we talking about? And then I want to make a statement that I want you to critique, having answered that question. Now, when I look at the writings of people like Kant and Feuerbach and Marx and Nietzsche, what I see are philosophers and social critics who are critiquing a heartless Christianity, a heartless religious system.
Yes.
And so I am very, questioning always when people say people are godless. When we say they're godless, what are we talking about? In light of what I'm saying. And, I look at the history of Germany, and you know, yes, you had the Holocaust there. I guess that's the Western part and so forth. I might get these wrong. I think the division took place sometime 1949, so when you had East and West Germany, right? Yes. And yeah, I because I've read so much German philosophy, I am able to look into the soul of Germany, and I do not see a heartless Germany. I see a heartless Christianity rather.
Well, this is a point well made. I want to differentiate. First of all, the godless part is basically the headers that I drew out of the internet of the study by Tom. What was his name? I think 10 years ago, who studied the religiosity in Eastern Germany, and that was a bit the chirp for the newspapers. But I think he chose it because what is not very conceivable to people from other parts of the world, especially from rather Christian countries like the United States, is really people who don't believe anything. They don't believe in a God. They don't believe that there is anything. It's pure atheism. So, well, you know, if you call us godless or whatever you want to call, or unchurched, it's not unchurched. It's really no confession to I believe in something. That is very, very different between the former Eastern part and the former Western part. Very different. You know, if I would go around here in Hamburg, the figures of people going attending church wouldn't be very high either, but I would certainly end up with a 60 to 80% margin of people answering, I believe in a higher power. Yes. But in Eastern Germany, they wouldn't say that. You would end up with 80 people out of 100 or between 60 and 80. So it's the inverse, saying, I don't believe that there's anything. Now, the reasons for that, they are up to the philosophers, sociologists, and is it the success of communism? Is it the heartless Christianity? All this is very pertinent. And I don't feel smart enough to just answer it in one piece and say, oh, well, this is the reason. And I also have my serious doubts whether Kant, Nietzsche, and what did you, Schopenhauer, what did you mention, whether they represent, which one?
Feuerbach.
Feuerbach.
Feuerbach. It is not man who is made in the image of God, but it's God who is made in the image of man.
Yeah, God being the projection of our wishes. But I would contend with it. I know it makes, if you think that Germans are made up out of their intellectual heritage, then that would be the conclusion. I doubt that they are 100% made out of that stuff.
Dennis, something we often hear here is, I'm a spiritual person, but not a religious person. And I think that may be at the heart of Dr. Hemming's question too. Mm-hmm. Is there a native spirituality that survives religion?
Well, that is as I said earlier, this is the trend here in all secularized Western societies. My point was just that in the former East, that wouldn't hold that theory. They just, I mean, these things serve us with opportunities that we didn't have. When one of our churches, or when any church that we have in Eastern Germany, they come up with a good project, with a nice neighborhood service, or with some idea which is up to date and it is relevant for the people, they don't have the label, you know. Here in the West, it's in Western part of Germany, it's always Adventists, sounds like a cult, probably a sect, probably dangerous, or let's figure it out. In Eastern Germany, it's who cares? You know, I never heard of Lutheranism and Adventism, whatever. You are Christians, you know, go and do your stuff. We have one example right now, very encouraging example. We have on the island of Rügen, if I would go back to the map, that would be a very nice touristic island, a little paradise in the Baltic Sea. I just spent the last weekend there with my wife, and you know, just taking the bicycle and exploring the island. And we had a dying church there, where the church actually said we can't run the house anymore, and the few people that stayed there said, well, sell us the house for a buck, and we managed, and then they sort of survived 25 years, and then it picked up. You know, people actually moved there to live there, and some of the families went back, with young kids. And the building, the house was completely run down. It was a mess, that house. And then they said, we want to build a new house. And since it was not part of the portfolio of the church didn't have a plan to, you know, how to fund them. And they said, we do the fundraising ourselves. And then they found that the state of Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, in which they live, actually subsidizes the building of religious places if they are socially active, because religiosity is waning in these parts. And the Lord actually blinded some of the politicians there, because they promised 300,000 bucks. And the newspapers wrote that they promised them. Then they found out that the church actually and the project didn't fulfill the conditions, but they couldn't go back behind their words, and they delivered, and they basically funded 50% of a new church building in a rural district where churches are disappearing. So that was very encouraging, and the people of that little town, they notice it and they like it. There's a place now, and a few Christians, and now it is to them to fill this beautiful place with life, church life.
Were there surviving churches in East Germany during the communist period?
Yeah, many of them.
Huh?
Surviving church, you mean denominations or Adventist churches?
Seventh-day Adventist churches.
Yeah, they were very active, and since there was a fence around them, you know, members couldn't run away. So just to, if you remember the map I showed you in the eastern part here, that was a conference on its own. We have many towns, small towns. There, I'm thinking of one town. It's called Parchim, very small town, beautiful historic town, and it used to have 70,000 population. I think it was run down to 20,000. I hope you can figure out what that means for a town to lose more than half of its population. The church, they had their own building with 70 church members, so very active, a pastor that lived in there. Nowadays, we are just renting out the building of the Baptist church there, and there are 6 to 10 people meeting there. And yeah, it's a dying church. Hmm. So some have survived, yes, in the bigger urban areas, Rostock, Greifswald, Wismar. Those are the areas where we still have churches. Some of them are very active and vital, but some of them also, many of them had to be closed. Yeah. And that's a real problem for pastors, because pastors have huge areas, huge surfaces which they serve. And for a Bible study, you have to do 1 hour to the left and 1.5 hours to the right.
I pastored a district like that. Cherry Ann, would you join us here? You're unmuted. Go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for your presentation, Dennis. I've actually visited that area in Germany. I worked on a project with the University of Flensburg. And so I visited that area a couple of times. And on one of my trips, I would have been there over the weekend. And so I wanted to go to church. And I tried to ask for help, to find the Adventist church, and nobody knew. They were like, oh, there are no churches on Saturday. And they were directing me. They said, oh, no, you can go to church tomorrow. But I did eventually find the church. But I found it interesting that none of them had ever heard of an Adventist church before, even though there is an Adventist church in Flensburg. I did find that, interesting. But my question is, do you find that members in the community how do they respond to community services or to the health message, since Bible study will take a long time? How do they respond to the other services of the church?
Thanks for your question. I can relate to your experience there in Flensburg, and also I'm happy to have someone here who has been to that church in the north. A church which I have to say, in all honesty, has the long-standing tradition of splitting every 10 to 20 years over some righteous dispute. They're just busy right now again. And so to answer your question, the communities, if churches are creative, and they see needs, these needs are always welcome. They are always welcome. Right now, one thing that works is one pastor in East Germany. He tried out. He has a PhD in psychology, so he's highly skilled in adult educational stuff, pedagogical stuff. And so he tried something new and said, well, let's just have courses or build like a life school, a school of life. He called it a school of life. So we get together, we have a topic, and these topics are not religious. They are, how to deal with depressions, how to about humor, about dealing with everyday life problems, with educational. He has always a set of presentations, and not only presentations, then they discuss, and people come, people like it. They talk about these issues. And so he said, well, perhaps it just works in my area, perhaps it might work in other places. We have a number of pastors now who he trained how to be school of life teachers. And this is a program, and as a pastor, you don't have to, the presentations are ready-made. You can draw from them, you can prepare and then present them. And we have many churches and pastors who say, well, I'm offering these courses about life and life's problems. And we have sort of a community that comes here, even through Corona and after Corona. I hear the first reports of people who say, well, we had 25 guests here last night, people who really stay true to this. And this is one thing that works well. It is, we haven't as yet solved the problem, as in many places, how to build in a bridge, because they will be very faithfully attending as long as you talk about the needs of life. Sometimes there are persons who say, well, we are sitting in a church here, tell us more about what you believe, you're nice people. But quite often they will say, as long as I can get my needs fulfilled here, it's okay, but don't talk about this Jesus stuff.
Okay, that's interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry Ann. Dr. Adigan?
All right, thank you, Dennis. If I understood you right, two conferences came together and formed this new one. Is that right?
Yes.
So my question is just the mechanics of this. We hear some of us at least, have advocated for the coming together of conferences, kind of flattening the organization. We've talked about this for decades, and have even tried to make some attempts to merge conferences, but it hasn't gotten traction. Mm-hmm. I'm interested in the dynamics. What precipitated this? What were the motivations? How did you get buy-in from the constituencies that had to vote mm-hmm. this? Can you tell us something about just strategically how you went about pulling this off?
Yes, yes, I can. Actually, those were these conferences were rather different in leadership before I became president in 2013. In 2015, actually, at the constituency meeting of this Lower Saxonia conference, they made a motion, the delegates were actually, to explore avenues of enhanced possibilities of co-working with the other conference. So there it was the delegates who said that they didn't use the word merger or fusion. They said we need to explore areas of working together better with our sister conference. So they had the mandate to go forward, and they approached us. I was just newly elected ever since two years. My mind was still very much in the old setting, I have to admit, because it was a bit of a paradigm shift. I had the spirit of local patriotism here. We have our nice little setting, and we have our fiefdom here that we can manage, and we know. But I was open to explore these thoughts. And then what happened is that we actually had a secretary who was telling me, listen, we have 17 pastors in the field. We have 2,500 members, and the work doesn't warrant a 100% employment here for me. Give me a church. So that had been going on for a while. And that's when we discovered, well, perhaps we are getting a little small here on the scale. If the conference secretary actually says, this is not a 100% job, there's a 50 will do. So when he was called to another conference, we elected one for 50%, just like him. And then they lost their conference secretary in the South. And they were figuring the same thing and said, we just need a 50% job. Why don't we take your secretary? So the secretary was actually elected secretary in 2 conferences already, with 50% each. Then the same thing happened to our treasurer. We lost our treasurer. He went to one of the institutions, and we thought, this is not a 100% job. And they needed one in the South as well. So we had the secretary and the treasurer already working for both conferences. And that's when we said, well, if you 2 guys are already traveling the whole region here, already knowing the mentality and the ins and out of 2 conferences, you are the scouts for the new country that we see ahead. You can tell us if it makes sense of just merging this stuff together, or if you actually run into a burnout because this is too big and it doesn't work. And 2 years later, both of them just reported, man, we should go ahead because this is feasible. This is manageable. They were cracking a bit because they had 2 constituencies, that they had to serve, with executive meetings, and so doubling up, and team meetings doubling up. And they were very interested, and we took it from there. And then we were very surprised because I thought that my conference here in Hansa, that was very patriotic so far, and with very rigid borders, I thought they want nothing to hear about it. So we took it to our the first time we took it to the executive committee, and they said, let's go for it. Let's, you do the figures, you present us the charts, and then we try it out, and we trust our secretary and our treasurer. They run around in both of these fields. We'll let them do, let us trust them. And we took it from there. We took it very slowly. It took us 2 or 3 years. We even, printed a magazine with all the questions and answers about merging and sent it to every baptized member of both conferences by mail. So nobody had an excuse to say, what merger? I have never heard about it. You got it in the mail, buddy. And so we merged. We had mutual pastors conventions and so on. It took it slowly. And I think, basically at the end, it worked. And when we did when we took the vote 3 weeks ago, I expected more discussion and more resistance, and it just went through like a breeze.
It's an interesting model, Raj, when you think about it, starting to share people and services before you actually bring the organization together.
Yeah, well, it wasn't a strategy. It's the way it grew, But we made it a strategy when we saw, well, this is an opportunity. Why don't we use it?
Mm-hmm. Yep, worked out well.
Yeah. At one point, Lauren, you might remember, we figured out that we could do centralized payroll for this whole union, because there are larger organizations than all 8 conferences put together here in this region, with centralized payroll and treasury. But even that, we couldn't pull that off either.
Yeah. Well, that has happened around 10 years ago. Ever since the whole of Germany, I think all of them, perhaps with one exception, we have centralized payroll and centralized bookkeeping.
Yeah.
I've long been fascinated, saying this to both of you, ex-conference president and conference president. I've long been fascinated at how possessive people are of their institutions. Even combining 2 churches that are next door to one another is very, very hard.
Yeah.
It always fascinates me. Why is it so hard to regroup into different groups? Carmen?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
This has been really fascinating. Thank you. I have a couple of related questions. Do your union, your division, your denominational leaders, quote unquote, above you?
Okay, can I just disrupt and demand for a 3-minute break, because I want to be able to listen, and I need to run for 3 minutes there. Perhaps you have to, just addressing a basic human need so that we can all be listening. Okay.
Please do.
Yeah, I'm gonna bring Raj back on here. Where are you here?
Lauren?
Yeah.
Can I ask you and Raj, this is different than when I asked Dennis. Here we have some administrative units combining, which means they have less representation. And in other parts of the world, it just seems like we have multiplication of units.
Yeah, Raj, I remember being in a meeting one time where one of the representatives from Africa got up and said, "Our church in Africa is so successful, we've already created 4 unions where there used to be 1." And I thought, well, that's really interesting, that a multiplication of administrative units was what you cited as your success.
And it might be related to a perception as to what these units contribute to the work, right? And what success looks like. If you're a conference, if you're a union, maybe that signifies success. I think some of us at least have felt that maybe the services that are being offered by conferences and unions perhaps are not that important to the success of the frontline church. And therefore, having all of these layers and so many of them really doesn't add much value. And that's a hard reality to come to terms with. But if what success looks like is to have multiple layers and a lot of people in these judicatory offices, then sure, let's have more unions and conferences.
Exactly. It's really interesting perception, and I've heard that very often from people especially in other parts of the world. Here, we have been talking, as long as I've been in ministry, we've been talking about combining judicatories. When I was in California, they were talking about, well, let's just do away with the Pacific Union and just have conferences. And then when I got over to Ohio, a guy named Raj Adikan got up at the union meeting and said, let's do away with the conferences and just run everything from the union. And that went over like a brick as well. So, I mean, this whole thing of how the church is organized, I mean, I've got to be in my bonnet about it, and I've written about it a lot. I do think that too much of our talent and our money, resources of all kinds, leaves local work and goes up into administration. And I find it a bit annoying. Carmen, you were going to talk to Dennis. Back?
Yes, I'm back. I put a jar of water here that wasn't a good idea. So come on.
I have a couple of related questions.
Yes.
And the first, well, they're basically connected. Do your union, your denominational layers above you, and I use that with a bit of irony, support you in your challenges? And what I mean by this, I guess, is in comparison to what I sometimes see in North America. Here, we also have every year a growing number of the nones, N-O-N-E-S, the people who no longer identify as believers or part of any organized religion, and also agnostics and atheists. We also have many communities that have significant population losses. And regardless, our evangelism tends to focus on the traditional methods. And primarily that is getting us members, new members. And without that, we in North America probably wouldn't have a lot of growth, but it tends to be among immigrant communities. And we don't seem to have anything to try for the groups that are not won through those traditional methods. And I sometimes hear leaders articulate a sense of congregations that aren't growing, regardless of the changed population and the spiritual perspectives in decline, as not trying and perhaps not worthy of continued support, like they're second-class Adventists. And as you tell us a little bit about that, what kind of support you have, is there any collaboration in which North American leaders ask you for your experiences and wisdom on how to remain faithful in those circumstances, which are also growing here?
Yes,
I was the sense here, Dennis, that we are following in the path of Europe. Basically, we're becoming a post-Christian.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I actually fear that question, not because for the sake of the union, because this is the Gretchen question from Goethe's Faust that is posed to us. When I say, well, we are living here in a very godless country, everybody, oh, so what do you do? Whoa, how are your successes? And I say, we're dying. That's it. So I wish I couldn't come up with the big stories of success, how we can turn around the steering wheel and do a 180 here. My predecessor as a conference president, Heinz Ewald Gattmann, he wrote his doctoral thesis about evangelizing methods in Germany in the second half of the 20th century. He basically analyzed all the strategies that we boiled down from union or conference levels down to the local church, and that we implemented. And his sober conclusion was that whatever method you bring up, it is just as effective as any other. So there wasn't really, because what we do is we try out something new or something old or something traditional or something joint venture or something from above. And we never do evaluation, not really. I mean, we never sit down and say, well, how effective was this, I remember the thing that went viral when I started as a young pastor in 1995 was the satellite thing. You might all remember, and it was an American-based thing, with the first one being by Mark Finley. And I think I had the only church I was. Fate struck me hard when I had the only church in the conference that was eager to take part in that venture. So for 25 evenings, I had to get up in front of the church with and do the MC. And what happened after 25 nights, with a lot of effort and buying a beam and buying a satellite dish and installing, was a big thing in the 90s, the result was that I was given a tape or a floppy disk at this point, or a diskette, that with an Excel sheet. That's the whole, and then they said to me, Pastor, now it's your turn. We did our work, we switched on the lights 25 times in a row, switched it off after the show, and here's the Excel sheet. That wasn't my conception of being a missional church, but so I took that Excel sheet. I checked all the addresses. 95% were my church members. The rest I could easily identify with the help of the conference as church members from other churches, eager and to see what this Mark Finley is doing there on through the sky. And then I ended up with 2 more addresses, and those were genuine people who had been at the nights. And one of them did not open the door, and the other one told me this was a very, very disturbing night there. I don't want to see you ever again. So, so much for the traditional thing back then. But I don't want to be pessimistic. We believe here that we are done with strategies from above. We have resolved that when churches want to try out something, we as a conference, we want to be able to haul up the financial or the personnel for it, and to just help them do stuff. Some of them traditional stuff, just try it out. So some of them perhaps crazy stuff. And we want to try it out, And we believe that evangelism and mission is done at the local church, which was one of the reasons why we said, let's cut down on administration so we have more funds for churches who want to try out. Our mission directors don't have strategies for the whole conference, and we don't want them to have strategies for the whole conference. We want them to go to individual churches who said, we want to do something, and to figure out what they can do.
One of the best leadership strategies I've seen is permission giving, helping people do creative thinking, giving them permission to do creative thinking, and then helping to support and solve problems for them, as opposed to what they did when I started ministry. They gathered us all together and said, we are all going to do the same thing now at every church throughout the conference. We're all going to do the same program, and we're all going to work at it together. And by golly, it is going to work in your church, or I'll know the reason why.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Carmen, you were follow
Well,
up.
yes, and thank you. And just very quickly, it just seems like we need a new definition of what being a faithful Adventist means, because what it used to be was about those numbers and the increases. And that is still true in some parts of the world, but we need a redefinition that applies to Adventists in different parts of the world where they don't work, so that this sense of being a second-class Adventist is not true, that we measure faithfulness or conceive of it in a different way. But thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I'm going to move on to Robert Johnston.
I know this guy.
Hi, Dennis. You probably know my father.
I think we met at the Apocalypse Symposium.
Well, yeah, I was at Freedom Sow. I didn't know that you'd remember me from that, but yeah, that was a great.
Yeah, well, I remember your furniture.
Oh, the lack thereof.
The tornado run down house.
Well, my question is, I mean, a lot of Western countries, as you know, Adventism is only growing because of immigration. And that can include immigrants that are traditional Adventists coming into the country to work from places like the Philippines or what have you. Mm. Is that true also in the Hansa Conference? Do you see a split between the East and the former East and West on that? And what percentage of the Adventists in your congregations would you say are native German versus immigrants? And then the second part of the question would be, how does that, let's say the effect of these immigrant, maybe more traditional, more conservative Adventists in the context of this very secular society, what kind of tensions do you see between progressives and conservatives that arise in the church in all of this? And how does that impact the relevance in secular society?
Yes, okay. So those two axes. To the first question, immigration. Yes, it has been said that the church is growing where there is a lot of immigration, as has been true for many parts of the world. Here in Germany, it was basically in the era after the fall of the division 90 to 2000, where we had the influx of Germans from Russia, from Kazakhstan, from Kyrgyzstan, from the former Soviet Union. You know that in the 700s.
When did that happen?
Well, 90 to 2000, roughly.
Oh, that's
there was a tree. Yeah, it's fascinating because in the 700s, I think, I got to get my history lesson straight. The Tsar Katarina, she thought Germans are a good bunch to have at the Volga in certain regions and very fertile regions of Russia. And she asked for them to come there and have settlements there and establish culture, establish farms, and they had villages, and they had German schools, and they had German pastors and German churches, and they had a huge German presence in Russia. I don't know the figures, but a couple of 100,000 that went there. Now, with the Second World War, being a German wasn't such a good idea anymore in Russia, and with the impact of communism, and most of these Germans were, for safety's sake, deported to all regions of the Soviet Union. Many to Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, many to Siberia. So they were scattered a bit everywhere. They still, ever since those 200 or 300 years, had German citizenship. And there was an agreement done after the war that they will remain, and they and their offspring will remain Germans. and they got permission to re-enter Germany and get German passport and citizens around the 90s, their 80s, 90s. So 2 or 3 or 4 million of them came back in 1 or 2 waves in those years, which largely affected the churches. Because all of a sudden, those who were Adventists, you know, they came back, and then we had a huge influx, and also we were growing a lot, but with it came huge potential for conflict. I think we were the only church who actually managed to still stay together. The Baptist church, because many of them were Baptists, split over the disputes between cultural clashes and forms of piety, because you can imagine that when they came back, being Adventist, being persecuted there, and they saw our liberal Western secular lifestyle and the way we dressed and what we drank and what we did, they thought, these guys, they are completely apostatized, they are heretics, you know. And now we have, and those churches that had because it was very regional, that had a huge impact of those German Russians or Russian Germans. They had lots of strife and contention, and they managed to integrate. Now this is 20, 30 years ago. We here in the north, we didn't have much of them, because they tended to concentrate in the center or in the south of Germany, and then the west more than in the north. We have a couple churches of them. We have ethnic churches here in the big metropolitan area of Hamburg. We have one international church, which is actually a Hispanic church. We have now an English-speaking group. And the largest ethnic group that is growing are the Ghanaians. It's a Ghanaian church here. We they have their own building, which was a huge thing, because never before here in Germany and here in the north, in Hamburg and in Germany in the whole, had a church built a new building for an immigrant church, for a Ghanaian church, and they were very happy. Although after 2 years, the building tended to be too small already. So they are growing. Yes. So this is the first axis that you mentioned, immigration. So this is a huge difference. We don't have much in terms of immigration in the eastern part of Germany, which is due to economic weakness, but also due to if you follow politics, due to people of color being afraid and anxious to go too deep into Eastern Germany, because there has been much problem with the AfD, the new party, which is rather racist, I would say, if I can lean out of the window and say it. The second thing, conservative versus progressive, I think here in the newly built Hanse Conference, we do have both strands of Adventism, but in a rather peaceful coexistence. They tend to split up into local churches, and here and then there is a little carnage going on, but that's it. There's not much contention and strife. There used to be 25 years ago, and it cost them one conference president and a lot of pastors, and then so they decided, well, let's have a truce.
Dennis.
Related to that, if I may, just a quick follow-up. How much do, I'll say, media ministries, internet, satellite, that sort of thing, and I mean, you mentioned Finley, but I'm talking about the independent type ministries. How much do those have an impact in your conference?
Not so much in my conference, or at least those who are fans of it keep a low profile and don't let me know. That might be one of the reasons. There are two, the biggest of which is called, I think you have it over there, it's called Amazing Discoveries. Do you have that over there as well? They are basically, that's the Walter Fite outlet. I think without Walter Fite, they would die financially. And so this is a bit there are churches who are fans of it, obviously. Here in the north, we don't have as much of those and as many problems as further south, because the split is really between forms of piety. It runs more along the axis of north-south than east and west. Shown in the fact that ever since the reunification of Germany, we haven't in 30 years managed to merge our two unions, which is ridiculous, because for 36,000 Adventists, maintaining two unions is a bit of a bummer.
Dennis, I don't know if you know that the Germans from Russia are one of the mainstays of the Seventh Adventist Church in the United States. These are my people. A lot of us moved up to North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, those places, and I could list a dozen people who were in top leadership who were from my home church in North Dakota.
Yeah. Okay.
So anyway, let's go on to Steve. Steve's.
Hi. Yeah, I'm here. I just came from a 2-hour drive down from camp meeting and just walked into the house. So perfect timing.
Thanks.
I want to say, first of all, I'm happy to talk to Pastor Meier. I see his comments on one of the blogs that we share, and I appreciate what he has to say. So nice to meet you. I have a very short and simple question, although maybe simple is the wrong word. You talked earlier about introducing people to the faith who have no background at all in Christianity or the Bible. Mm-hmm. I'm just wondering how you teach them. Like, what do you teach them first? What do you teach them second? And just to distinguish my question from a topic that has come up before, I'm not asking about whether it works, or whether you're having success. I'm really interested more in how you structure your teaching plan. Mm-hmm.
That's a really good question, Steve. Very good.
Yeah, it's a very good question. I have been teaching courses actually since many years as a pastor, and we called them Basics of Faith. That was a very honest venture, because people who joined these courses wanted to know about Christianity. And the first thing I said, and the first night, it's actually a course, we take 8 to 10 to 12 people, and we get people who are interested, and we say two things. We say, we're going to teach you the basics of Christianity. It's up to you if you like it and if you want to join, but we don't want to press you into anything. We want you to be educated of what Christianity is. And so if you are just here, some of them were Muslim, by the way, said, I came to a Christian country. I just want to know what Christianity is. I said, you're in the right place here. The second thing that we say is, this is non-denominational. This is the basics of Christianity as most Christians would agree upon. And whenever I mention a topic where my church is at odds with the rest, I will indicate it so that okay, this is not the mainstream. This is the bunch of Dennis that believes this. So being very honest about saying this is what most Christians agree on, and this is where we deviate a bit for reasons that need to be shown if you're interested. And what I found out is that most questions, as you can imagine, are not around dogmatics. They're not into that stuff, about which form of baptism and which day of the week. And those are things they're not interested. What they're most interested and intrigued about is the person of Jesus Christ. I started out having, in the 10 nights that we have together as a group, and we eat together, and we have a weekend together. So it's a very communal event. I started out with having the first 2 nights just about Jesus, who he was, some historic background, and what he did, and, or why he died. And I found out that it's not enough. I needed to go with 3 nights, 3 weeks, the first three weeks, just discussing who is this Jesus. So we take it from the very center for those, that is, who are interested in getting to know Christianity as either faith or religion, whatever their motives may be. And if you don't focus on the very center from the start, I fear that you can't just wiggle in from the side, with a little cooking course here and stop smoking thing there, because you're going to lose them. They will take their cooking course and they will say goodbye because they're not interested in the rest. But if you're very honest and say, this is the course of Christian basics, 10 nights, and we're going to teach you the ins and outs of being a Christian, and then you can choose for yourself if you like it or not. We felt that this is a very honest approach, and the people that we met over the years, some of whom I think in the church that I pastored before becoming president, 90% of the baptisms was through this work. Not many baptisms, perhaps 20 or 30 over the time of 15 years. But those people said, yes, this is honest and we want more of it. And I even had people who said, yeah, well, I'm going to this charismatic church over there, but they didn't have a course running right now, so I'm coming to your place just to catch up on the basics. And I said, you're welcome too. And I remember one lady who said, because this charismatic church had the habit of that it is very important to have a prayer of, how do you call it, where you give your life to Jesus,
Commitment.
A commitment prayer. We don't do that very much or in a very structured way. But then she came back a week later after the course was finished and said, you didn't do that with me. I want that now. And I said, well, let's sit together and pray together and you give your life to Jesus.
So prophetic interpretations may not be the place to start in your region?
No, because you would have to explain what prophecy is and a lot of historic stuff. And I don't think, I feel that where it works, let me just be honest, the people that we tend to get are odd, to say the least. I don't know.
I think a lot of us would say that there is quite an admixture of that sort of thing here too, not just those we attract, but those who we have already attracted. Right now in the United States, there's a strong sense of almost a conspiracy in the air. And I think there are people who are attracted to Adventism for that reason, because prophecy sort of blends in with the conspiracy. I'm going to ask Mr. Arsand to unmute and speak with us. Trond, are you there?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I would imagine, Trond, that in Scandinavia, a lot of the same questions about a preponderance of unbelievers would be true as well.
Of course. No, I think Norway got 4,000 Adventists out of 5 million people. I very much appreciate your honesty, Dennis Meier, and I would like to have your answer. What's your story of the Seventh-day Adventist Church as for Nazism? not to enter into detail, but what's your been your lessons of this story? I ask because I don't know, but I know a little about the Lutheran Church and the Bekenntniskirche in the study of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and a theologian I love by all my heart, and I'm very curious to know this story and what your lessons are as for the Adventist Church and Nazism, this dark chapter.
Yeah,
That's my question.
very good question, of which I hoped that my father, being a pastor, and his generation would have solved all the questions already, but they didn't. Johannes Hartlab, a lecturer at the University of Friedensau, has written his thesis, a very thick book about, and has done lots of research about especially that issue. It's if you are into German and can read it, either you should read then it's really worthwhile. The 700 pages are long, but he does a good job of tying together the history and doing the research, and it's the go-to place for that question. There are 2 or 3 other books, but this is the one I would highly recommend. And he has been to our pastors' meetings presenting on this. And I think one of the first lessons that we needed to know, to learn, was on an emotional level, that is to try to put ourselves in the shoes of the denomination and of the leaders back then, and actually try to assess how much nerve we would have today to become martyrs and to join the resistance. And he did a couple of exercises with us where he sort of took us from the rather arrogant stance that, we know better and it could never happen to us, to a real life situation where your church is threatened. That is one of the things. The second is that we have to acknowledge when we fail. And the Adventist Church in Germany did fail in a lot of cases. And that but it took the church until I think 2000 or 2005 to really draft a statement of confession of sins. It exists. It can be downloaded from the German Adventist site. We have since drafted 1 or 2 statements further, because I think last year was 70 years of the end of the war or something like that, or the genocide. And I was in the committee that drafted a statement where we tried to draw lessons from that dark chapter of history. So I think there's much awareness of it in our generation, and now much more than in the previous ones that were still too much hurt, and they were up till the 80s. It was too painful or too close. They didn't manage to really address that dark chapter of history.
Dennis, what was the name of that book again? Several people were asking.
Yeah, well, let me try to figure it out here on on my computer.
Well, I'll give you a moment here. We're going to take a break. We have a rather odd little system here that we've been doing since the beginning, and that is because we announced it to be 2 hours long. We have a benediction at 3:30, and then people like talking. So we will talk for a little.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yes.
Kind of like talking in the entryway of the church after church. So I asked Dr. Hemmings if she would give us a benediction, and she's unmuted. So Dr. Hemmings, go ahead.
Again, God, we thank you for this forum, and thank you so much for everyone gathered here every Sabbath, wanting to know more, understand more, and to be better persons. So as the psalmist prays, teach us your way, lead us in your truth, and guide us not only here, but throughout the rest of our week. In Jesus' name, amen.
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 Thank you, Dr. Hemmings. I appreciate it so much. Okay, Dennis has just posted the link to that book. So I'm going to, let's see, Mr. Arson has spoken. So Arthur Clem, join us here.
Okay, got on. All right. A question. What I'm wondering about, because we were introduced to this on Adventist Today by the fact that atheists are so numerous in your area of Germany. How aggressive are the atheists there? Are they more agnostic? A term I've heard around here often is the term apathetic or apatheist, who doesn't, somebody who really doesn't care and isn't that interested in it. How would you characterize, or it's probably unfair to characterize a whole group of people as fitting into one neat category, but could you describe for us how atheists tend to approach Christianity and particularly Adventism in Germany?
Yes, I would say it is not militant. We have agnostic would be a good term. People who just say I have no opinion about it. I'm not. If you believe in God, it's fine with you. I just don't happen to believe in a God. That would be most of the people here that I can relate or remember. There is more and more a rallying of the so-called humanists or humanistic associations. There are a couple of associations in Germany under the label of humanists, and this is a bit a euphemism for atheism here in Germany. And humanist, even though I don't like it, because I feel like I want to be a humanist too. I like the term. My sermon or my meditation at the beginning made that clear. God loves people in a very humane way. I want to be one caring for people. I want to be a humanist. I like the thought, but somehow it has been, taken hostage by atheism. They tend to rally their forces. I read about it every now and then, but the impact has to be seen. There are a couple of experiments they do. They have one atheistic church now in Berlin. That is an experiment they have, where they can get together and they sing songs together and they relate their lives together. And it's much like a church, but very decidedly, we don't believe in any God. So they're emulating some of the aspects of church without being one. It tends to be seen if that will carry them somewhere. But all in all, I would agree with what you said. This is not very militant and not hostile. It's not a hostile environment. I have many pastors who say, well, my atheist neighbors and so, they are the nicest people and they help a lot. And I think an atheist is someone to be feared, as some people say, well, this is dangerous terrain. I mean, many are surprised at how human and how neighborly the people surrounding them are. How nice, very, very nice people, very friendly people, who are just as helpful. If if your car breaks down at night, they will come out and tow you. No sweat.
We have here the transition from Christianity, out of Christianity, has involved a bit of a sort of activist atheism at times. sort of the Richard Dawkins sort of atheist.
Yeah, I followed that up.
And that's not necessarily always true. There are a lot of apatheists, as Art called them, which is a great word, Art. I really appreciate that. It's a great word. But before we finish up, I don't see any more hands raised here. So before we finish up, let me interview you just a little bit about Germany and women in ministry. You have become, along with a couple of the Scandinavian conferences, sort of the central place for pushing back against the General Conference on their attitude towards women in ministry. Now, this started, if I'm not mistaken, folks here on the screen, I think you are talking to the guy who made the very first motion for a conference in a meeting for a conference to go ahead and ordain women, and it passed initially, didn't it, Dennis, in your union?
Yes, I wouldn't call it the very first. I think the first major commotion was in 2012, where a lay member of one of the churches actually brought up a motion to the constituency meeting, the regular one of the union, the Northern German Union, in Geseke, a small town somewhere in North Rhine-Westphalia. And it made its way on the agenda there. And everybody was happy. There was a good discussion. It was not too heated. There were only two parties present, as far as I can remember. There were those who were very much in favor of it. It turned out to be 85%. And 15%, most of which spoke against the motion just for reasons of timing. So clearly there wasn't a party. And I've never felt that there are really seriously people who are against women in ministry. Those who were against were just those who would weigh things differently, say that the unity with the world field ranges above the egalitarian drive. That was in 2012. Then you all know what happened in 2015. Then we sat together as conference presidents in 2016 and said, how are we going to deal with it, seen that. And then we decided in 2017, also my union here, to just suspend ordination altogether and to do just commissioning. Something that I think it was in Adventist Today, I critiqued as all too clever canonical way of wiggling through paragraphs instead of just making yourself straight. And the chirp that I usually use also in our union meetings was, we as Germans want to protest without anyone noticing. That will not work. So
you were what we say here, too clever by half.
Yes, and so I think in 2019, at the union executive meeting, I made that motion. I said, let's just go back to our 2012 resolution, which meant ordaining without regard to gender. And then we had this motion postponed 2 years, one for reasons of let's wait for the GC, and the second time for reasons of let's wait for the GC. But then I don't know why. I mean, this is 2019, and all of a sudden, it wasn't me. It was still off the agenda. Yeah, it was tabled every year. But in the middle of the year, the union president said, or the officer said, well, let's take it on now because we resolved that by the latest end of this year, we will take a decision. And since the GC in session is only next year, we might as well vote on it now. And that's when the vote passed once again with an 80% margin. And those opposed were once again those who said, let's wait. And so it was just a majority of those who said, well, we're done waiting.
Yeah. And so you will be going ahead. You actually have some people ready to be ordained.
Yeah, well, the one of the I think the funniest moment was in 2015, you know, just after the vote. For 3 years already, we had the vote to ordain. We hadn't ordained anyone between us, just for lack of candidates. Mm-hmm. We didn't have anyone to ordain. No woman pastor in the line for. Then we had a president's meeting with Ted Wilson near Frankfurt in a hotel, and I remember, and it was very funny because he said, well, I know what you resolved in 2012, and for the past 3 years you have had a moratorium, and I'm very happy for you that you didn't ordain. And so I looked around to my colleagues and I thought, who of my colleagues will tell them that it was just for lack of opportunity? But we thought, let's keep a low profile, you know? Nobody said anything. So many fields in the world and the GC, I think, believe that we were just being nice, not ordaining. But it was just because we didn't have any pastor who was ready to be ordained. Now it's different at this time. We have since ordained a couple of women pastors, and we are about to ordain one, actually that will be the first that will be ordained with a ceremony in October.
Is that Jeanette?
No, it's not the one that you mentioned in the what we mentioned in the article. She's the editor-in-chief of the German editing house, the Adventist editing house. She has been basically we called it a commissioning service, but it was the same
ordination.
So it was the same mechanics, you know. But interestingly enough, I have spoken to because it's our conference, the pastor who will be ordained in October, and she was very reluctant. I said, we're not going to club you over with anything, you know, it's you call the shot. If you want to wait, then we wait. You will have all the privileges that you need. And it's interesting, she didn't, and many, and another one I have here also, they don't want to be poster childs of women's ordination. They just want to be treated normal.
They want to be.
They want to be passed and be for it a normal thing. So that one that we are going to ordain in October said, I want no article about it, I want no pictures about it. I don't want Adventist Today and Spectrum magazine to report about it. I want my church to be there and my president to be there and have a nice meal afterwards and just have a good ordination and then go on with my life and my service. And I can completely sympathize with her decision. And I said, this is exactly how we're going to do it. We have another case here, which is more interesting, actually, because she is close to retirement. And she has been a woman pastor ever since 1885. And she was ordained in her church with the long-standing workaround solution, being ordained as an elder. See, this was the smart solution that we Germans always have a smart way of getting around the paragraphs. We just ordained them as elders in the church and treated them as ordained pastors ever since. So nobody could, challenge us on that. And when we took the decision now, I said, the union is just going to hand out all those certificates. And I said, yeah, well, what about her? She isn't one of the candidates since 2017. She is a candidate from 30 years ago. And they said, well, we need another decision and we need an ordination ceremony. I said, no, that's not going to happen because her ordination ceremony was 30 years ago. And that's how we played it all that long. And we're not gonna, we're not gonna have a fake ordination once again. And she is one of the pastors in the field here who has been waiting the longest, 30, 35 years, for being acknowledged as being a full-time pastor with ordination credentials. And I'm not the one handing out the certificate to her, being the last one with another commissioning or ordination service. I said, I want this certificate for her with her name on it and with the date of her ordination, 1985 or 1991 or something. And I just want to give her this certificate, and that's it. And that's all she wants. And she doesn't want the journal and the media coverage.
Doesn't want attention for it.
No. She says, I've been fighting. Not only have I been fighting for it 30 years, but I have given up on that fight 10 years ago.
I'm going to ask Ingalil to join us. I had been chatting with Ingalil on the chat. We're almost done here, Dennis, but asking her if it wasn't the same in Scandinavia very much as it is in Germany. And I suspect the attitudes toward religion are not dissimilar in Galil, although I'm not absolutely sure.
They have a state church.
We don't anymore. Yeah, sort of. No, it's not state church anymore. It was disconnected, Annette, what, 5-10 years ago.
Okay. Which country?
Sweden.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Sweden. And I hear similarities, but also differences. Because you also come from Eastern Germany, where Christianity wasn't that common before or taught. So the older generation in Sweden, they know the basics. But the younger generation, they are not as knowledgeable anymore. And we can't have big campaigns or anything like that. So we work with ICOR, Friendship, Family Church, and I would like Annette Frank actually to pitch in. You are working with a house church in your home, which I think is really, really interesting to reach people that's not that interesting in Christianity.
Yeah, that is interesting. Are you doing house churches very much in Sweden, Ingalil?
Some are starting to do house churches as a project.
Yeah, I have said for years, I think if there is something that ought to be tried, it is house churches. We have people sort of kind of promoting it, but it hasn't really gotten off the ground. But this whole notion of keeping a dedicated clubhouse sitting empty for 6 days of the week in order to come and spend 2 hours in it on Sabbath is just a crime. And the mere fact that we have a building setting there makes it seem like a privileged place to come and not a welcoming place to come. So I don't know. But Ingalil, thank you. By the way, Ingalil, do you have any idea what's happened? I don't know I knew Goran. I don't know your new people here in Sweden. What are they doing with women's ordination right now? Do you have any idea?
Oh yes, we treat everyone equal, so no one is ordained in Sweden. Everyone has equal privileges, equal pay, everything, but we don't ordain either men or women. So, and it's unlawful in Sweden.
So that's kind of where you were standing before, Dennis, and
yes,
now you've kind of just gone ahead and become revolutionary here and said, we're going to do it.
Well, there was another reason for it. The reason was that we were, I think 2019, we were reprimanded for doing what we not did, namely ordain. And that came rather unexpectedly in the executive committee, autumn council. Germany, along with some other fields, was reprimanded, and we asked how can we be reprimanded for something that we don't do, namely ordain. How does this relate to the working policy? First, secondly, why did this procedure not follow according to the paper that was so contentious 2 years ago? I think how to deal with issues of unity. And why didn't you talk with us beforehand and things that were outlined in the paper? Why didn't you follow the procedure that we disliked in the first place? So this is basically our second issue with it. And we never really got much answer for that in 2 years. And now any offer, if there was somebody at GCL, let's talk about it. We said, well, we talk about it, but we will only talk about it with the people who reprimanded us. And that's the executive committee. That was a public act in face of the whole world. So if we don't get a hearing there and we can't get our case in there, then we won't do, back talks somewhere in some offices.
Yeah.
So this is the story behind it, and I think Sweden was not reprimanded.
We were reprimanded.
Yeah, okay.
We were supposed to ordain men. So we were reprimanded that we didn't do that.
Yeah. Is your daughter? She works in the children's ministry. Has she been commissioned?
No, she actually hasn't.
Interesting. Okay.
Annette, has you been commissioned? Oh. Yes. Yeah, I'm talking to Annette Frank, who is there too on the screen.
Oh, Annette, yes, I met Annette today for the first time.
Yeah. No, Carolina has actually not been commissioned.
Carolina has not. Thank you very much, Ingelo, for joining in here. I appreciate that. I'm going to, Yvonne, you have the last word, and then we are going to end the meeting. And Dennis, thank you so much. This has been just fascinating. I want to continue this sometime with you in a few different topics, and maybe you and I can strategize a little bit. But this whole thing of culture and faith is always fascinating to me. I just endlessly so. Because we're seeing such rapid cultural change here. Something we didn't even talk about was what I have often read is that the downfall of religion in Europe had a lot to do with 2 successive wars. And I'd like to find out more about that. Yvonne, you have the last question or comment.
Yes, thank you, Dennis Meier, for this. I think I find many similarities between the attitudes in Germany and in Scandinavia. I know Sweden and Denmark, but my comment is actually just an appendix to what Ingalill said. We have had women pastors in modern times from the beginning of the 80s in the Swedish Union. We are a small union, small membership, but we have had quite a few over the years. When we started, and I was starting in 87, then we were ordained as elders, and then eventually things were, equalized in ways of pay and duties, and so on. What I feel now is a bit of a danger is that we have a rising surge of quite a strong conservatives among young people. And in that case, the matter of women's ordination is a non-issue, and it is more or less scorned upon as absolutely going against the world church. It is a small but very strong group, and I think you have to be aware of that because it's linked to other kinds in other matters in theology that can be much more dangerous. So that is my view of it. And
Thank you very much, Yvonne.
We
And
come from a country where women have been in the pulpit for 150 years.
we're losing you here, and I don't know, the connection must be bad, so I'm going to go ahead and mute you.
Yeah, well, but I got the gist of that, and yes, we sometimes we observe that in a couple of churches we have, for instance, since many years we have the Adventist Theological Society (ATS) organizing a youth rally every year, and they draw crowds, 1,000, 2,000 people attend, and perhaps not that much, but there is a tendency that young people always find ways to revolt against the previous generation, and they know how to hurt us. Perhaps it's a question of developmental psychology, whether it is an understatement or underestimation. It needs to be seen. I don't know. We will see. But yes, when they try to, young people are in their phase of acquiring an identity, and there are voices in Adventism that can deliver on that.
Yeah, that's very true. They've got a very good point. Well, Danke, mein Freund, I appreciate it very much. It was a great. I just want to say Jack Hain here was talking smack about the German mafia and the church from the North Dakota German mafia. Just don't pay any attention.
Yes. I hope I'm downloading the chat.
Yeah, don't pay any attention to him. He's one of them himself. But
yeah, I can.
A lot of the names that you would have seen, particularly about 30, 40 years ago, at the very top of the church, were people from North and South Dakota. Yeah, and still some of them. The president of Loma Linda University, Heinrich, that's a North Dakota name. So there's a lot of us. Yeah, it's a very interesting story. I've done some study on it. The Germans from Russia managed to remain Lutheran and Catholic through their experience in Russia and the Ukraine. But when they came to the United States, they fragmented into lots of different religions. And I've often said, Dennis, there's a reason why so many North Dakota Germans became Adventists, and so many Adventists were North Dakota Germans. We liked a religion that had good, solid rules where we know who was right and who was wrong, and we could say that we're right and our neighbors were wrong, and we rather enjoyed that. It was an appealing religion to us Germans. Lots of good rules.
Yes.
Yeah, but that
to either stick to or get around, which is fun. It's a fun sport too.
There you go. Either stick to or rebel against. Yeah. People saying, people say, well, why do you eat meat? And they say, we don't. That was from Ellen White. That's not for us. That was for the New Englanders, not for the Germans. So they always had their excuses. Anyway, our time is passed up, and Dennis will chat a little bit later. This was excellent, and we have to continue this conversation later on. Goodbye, everyone. I appreciate it very much. So long, and we will see you again next Sabbath. Dr. Turner is going to be teaching for us. Dr. Lawrence Turner. Bye bye.
Oh, very nice.